panelists, go. Fred's right over there, he's wearing a light blue shirt. Go get him, beat him up. Did that change your behavior, your ability to think for yourself? I disagree with your statement that incitement of violence should be disallowed. Every person is responsible for their own behavior, no matter who says what to them. And starting to even think about drawing a line is problematic. All of you.
Anybody want to comment?
Well, I represented a riding in Alberta, in Edmonton, that was the most, I think it's the most multicultural riding in Alberta. It was. And there were pagodas, there were mosques, there were synagogues, every religion and background. And the only way you're going to say it's because I wanted to get elected, and you're right, that was a factor for 8 times. But you had to be a bridge without fear or favor for everybody. Every community knew you would stand up for them if they needed help. And that's, so if you're probably saying to yourself, well, that's because you have to get elected. Well, I don't have to get elected, you're probably saying.
But that's not the point. The point is that the government shouldn't draw laws on what people say, period. If you want to perpetuate yourself in a certain manner to achieve a certain goal, that's your individual choice. But governments shouldn't draw lines at all.
No Irish or Jews allowed? How about that?
Do you think...
There is a, in fairness, I think that there is a difference between the kind of anti-hate speech laws that many of us, that most of us are talking about, okay, which I disagree with, and I believe Terry disagrees with as well, and laws that prohibit incitement to violence, and only because they're qualitatively different. The incitement to violence is where you actually have a mob, and the whole dynamic is different than just the example you gave, which was very interesting. And so where you're actually saying, and it doesn't have to be racially or ethnically motivated. It could just be after Vancouver gets eliminated from the Stanley Cup playoffs, okay? So you have a mob running down the street, and a couple of guys are going, okay, let's go, we're gonna burn those cars, and off they go, and the mob follows them, etc. So we've had, for a very, very long time in our society, laws against that, where there is a line, and the courts have adjudicated where that line is. It's very different from anti-hate speech laws, though. It's very different. And in fact, point of trivia, this is where the term reading the Riot Act to someone comes from, because the anti-incitement laws traditionally in England were the Riot Act, so the police would come when there was a mob, and someone would stand up and go, and he'd actually read the Riot Act to the mob and say, okay, you have to disperse because we're not going to tolerate violence and destruction of property, which is different from the other stuff.
But each member of the mob is still an individual and responsible for their personal actions.
But I mean, I think the best example of really incitement to violence is maybe Radio Mille Collines in Rwanda, where they basically said, you have to go out and chop up. So that was a very horrific example of that. But I think the American standard would be something like imminent. It would be incitement to imminent violence or lawless action that is likely to result in that. So it's not enough that you incite to violence. It has to be imminent, and it also has to be likely to occur. So if you stand, so when you say the context of this meeting, when you say that would not, you would not be liable for prostitution, but so it would have to be a situation where you'd say, okay, now you're crossing from speech to action to a lawless or violent action, and I think under those circumstances it's a manageable standard. Not that it's 100% clear at all times, but I think it's manageable.
Can I just very quickly?
We want to get, of course, to the all of our friends here, but this is what I was trying to get at earlier when I was talking about lines, right? Where is that line exactly? And I think wherever she went, there she is. I think we would probably agree 99% on the proposition that there should be no violence. But, when you have a clear case, where you've got a mob, and you've got some geezer up there, and he's saying, all right, now everybody start throwing rocks and breaking windows and turning cars upside down and so on, and that, the mob is incited to do this, the mob does this, crimes are committed, then you can pinch the guy, you can bust him, you can prosecute him, right? But what about those instances that we're facing now, where nowadays, where we're told very, very clearly, you will not blaspheme the prophet, because if you do, there will be violence, there will be vengeance, there will be mayhem, and innocent people will be made to pay. Now, the individual who is put in the position of then deciding, am I about to say what I was about to say? Or should I restrain my speech? Should I make the observation about the Prophet Muhammad that I was about to make? If I do, knowing that violence and mayhem will result, have I knowingly incited violence? You see what I mean?
I don't think that would be termed incitement, because if I was to burn a Quran, say, then I'm not actively inciting someone to violence. Yeah, but then there's a very big difference between me saying, let's go and burn down that mosque and kill the Muslims in there, and saying something knowing that there's a potential risk that things will kick off. Because if you allow a heckler's veto like that, then I could say, well, I quite like classical liberal ideas, and I find that the majority of people in Denmark don't like those ideas, and they criticize them. So I'm going to get my liberal friends together, and every time you say something bad about Adam Smith or capitalism, we're going to bash your skull in. And then we're going to do it on such a scale as to say, no, you can't do that, because otherwise Jacob and his friends will come and smash up things, and that's just not a durable thing. It basically gives them an incentive to the most violent and extreme groups to shut down public debate. And there was a great example. At one point, Saturday Night Live had this skit called Jesus Uncrossed, where Jesus comes out from the tomb and he starts shooting Romans with a machine gun. It was clearly blasphemous. I personally found it funny, but I can understand if Christians were offended. Saturday Night Live would never in a million years do the same about the Prophet Muhammad or something related to Islam. And that's because Christianity has there might have been angry letters to the producers of Saturday Night Live, but none of them would fear for their lives. And you can't have different standards like that. You can't say, well, we know that a significant minority among Muslims will be so offended that they'll turn to violence, and therefore we can't criticize Islam. That's simply unacceptable.
Actually, I don't think anybody's got the criminal code here, but basically the incitement section says that to invite or incite hatred against a recognizable religious or cultural group, words to that effect. Just thinking that minister in Florida, when he burned the Quran, he was not presumably violating that section of the Canadian criminal code. Of course, they don't have it in the States. Why not? So maybe Terry does he fall on the okay side of the line, your line, or
Terry Jones?
No, fellow, yeah, Jones.
Yeah, Terry Jones.
Well, that's the question. That's what I'm struggling.
But you don't have to.
I consider, sorry, you're going to use a very quick microphone.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just very briefly, I don't consider Terry Jones to be any different from someone, particularly the second go around, when in fact it did incite. It's not even really an incitement, because these are manufactured and very programmatic and systematic organizations of rage. But the second time around, when his little antic resulted in the deaths of those UN workers in Mazar-e Sharif. Now you can make the case, and I would agree with you, that this is different Terry Jones is doing is in its content different from somebody who goes to a mosque with a mob and says, all right, you muzzies, you know, you're all a bunch of damn whatever, and starts a big fight and people get hurt and glass gets broken and so on. But the function of what he did is absolutely brilliant. And he knew what was going to happen.
I think the thing is, you never actually know when you cross, you know, okay, so let's say that the,
We're supposed to have,
Microphone.
we're supposed to have turns.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Okay, so Robert?
Okay, right. First of all, I'm going to talk very fast. But first of all, the fire in a crowded theatre thing really ought to be put to rest because it is really out of date. When Oliver Wendell Holmes thought of it, theatres were wooden, rickety structures. Now they're like this, and the fire alarms and fire systems have. If I yell fire, I mean, who's going to care, really? And just very briefly, why not abolish the libel laws altogether and go back to dueling, as the excellent Kathy Shadle suggested in her blog 5 Feet of Fury? Seriously, except you could choose grammar as weapons and that sort of stuff. You know, if it comes to dueling, I shall choose grammar. And it is quite possible to hold the theory that the burqa must be banned and classify it as a weapon of war, similar to what was done in the Scottish Highlands to bagpipes and Highland dress. Because really, that's what it is. It should be classed as a weapon of war. And finally, why do we have to say the Prophet Muhammad and not the Prophet Joseph Smith? And the Holy Book of Mormon and the Holy Quran and not the Holy Book of Mormon? Because those things should be compared rather than all this stuff about Abrahamic religions. Thank you.
Robert, you stole my thunder. I was going to say, can we stop calling him the Prophet Muhammad and the Holy Quran? He's not my prophet, thank you very much. And I suspect that he's not the prophet of most people here. I don't mean that as an insult or offensively. I just, you know, really, the Prophet Muhammad, I don't recognize him as a prophet. How many people here recognize him as a prophet? But we all refer to him as the Prophet Muhammad. I just find that so odd.
Well,
By the way, I'm sorry, I don't want to take on Kathy Shadle, by the way. So if it comes down to a duel, she can win altogether, but it's not. She really is 5 feet of fury for those.
Or 4 feet of fury.